everyone, and welcome back to the Wisdom by Harry YouTube channel. My name is Harry.
And I'm Mary. We're so excited to have you here today for another fascinating episode.
So today, we are going to be looking at some interesting English phrases and vocabulary all about relationships and pregnancy.
Ooh, very exciting.
I know, right? And just to spice things up even more,
Yeah.
we're going to be looking at an English learning podcast.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, so, it's going to be a fun one.
That's awesome.
We're going to be pulling out some of the most interesting phrases and words from this podcast episode and breaking it down for you guys.
Love it.
So yeah, let's jump right in.
Okay.
The first phrase I want to talk about was sleeping with.
Okay.
Because, on the surface, it seems like a very basic phrase, right?
Yes, you would think so.
But actually, it can have a completely different meaning
Yeah, definitely.
in conversation.
It's one of those things that if you're learning English,
Right.
you could get really tripped up
For sure.
because you might think it means literally sleeping in the same bed as someone when 99% of the time
Totally.
it means something else.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's like a secret code almost.
Yeah, it's like a euphemism
Right.
for a sexual relationship.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And speaking of secrets and relationships,
Ooh, tell me more.
this podcast episode
Yeah.
deals with kind of a crazy love triangle situation.
Oh, yeah, it's like a big old mess.
It's like a soap opera.
Yeah.
So basically we have Veronica,
Okay.
her boyfriend, and this jealous doctor.
Oh my God, I know, and the doctor makes up this whole pregnancy thing.
I know, it's crazy.
It's wild.
And it really highlights some really interesting vocabulary.
For sure.
Like words like confess, overwhelmed, and jealousy.
Yeah, those are very powerful words.
I know, right?
Yeah.
So for example, confess
Yes.
kind of implies that you're admitting to something.
Right, like you're admitting to something bad?
Yes, something that you've been hiding.
Exactly. Like
Yeah.
you're getting it off your chest.
Right, and in this situation, the doctor finally confesses that she wasn't actually pregnant.
Oh man, she really messed up.
I know.
Yeah.
And then the word overwhelmed,
Right.
it just makes you think about all of the emotions
Uh-huh.
that the doctor must have been feeling.
For sure. I mean, it's got to be like a whirlwind, right?
Yeah, to drive her to this place
Oh, really?
where she would lie about something like that.
Exactly. I mean, it just shows how powerful emotions can be,
Right?
when you're in that state of mind.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then obviously a huge part of this whole situation
Yeah.
is jealousy.
Oh, for sure.
Right.
The green-eyed monster.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So how would you define jealousy?
Jealousy. Oh, man. It's a tough one.
I know.
But I think it's basically that feeling
Yeah.
when you think someone is threatening a relationship that you value.
Oh, that's a good way to put it.
Yeah. And in this case, it's like the doctor is so fixated on Veronica that she's willing to just sabotage everything.
Right.
Yeah.
Ruin Veronica's life.
Exactly. It's crazy.
I know.
Yeah.
But, this podcast episode, it's not all doom and gloom.
Oh, good.
There are some lighter moments,
Okay.
thanks to some idioms that they use.
Oh, I love idioms.
Yeah.
They're so fun.
So have you ever heard of the phrase a bun in the oven?
Oh, yeah. A bun in the oven.
Yeah.
Classic.
Right.
What does it mean?
It means someone is pregnant.
Yes.
It's such a cute way to say it.
I know.
Instead of just being like, oh, she's pregnant.
Right. It's much more fun.
It's like, oh, she's got a bun in the oven.
Yeah.
It's like the baby is the bun and the womb is the oven.
Exactly.
So yeah, it's a really common idiom
I love that.
in English.
There was another idiom that I thought was interesting to come into the picture.
Oh, yeah.
So in this story, the doctor is totally furious
Right.
that Veronica's boyfriend kind of messed up her plan.
Yeah, she's like, why is he here?
I know.
Yeah.
Just by existing, ruining her plans
Right.
by just being Veronica's boyfriend.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So to come into the picture
Yeah.
means basically to become.
Yeah. It means to become important or involved in a situation.
Yeah. And in this case, the boyfriend just throws a wrench in the whole scheme.
He really does.
I know.
Yeah.
What do you think is interesting about that phrase?
That's a good question.
I know, right?
I think for me, it just highlights how unpredictable relationships can be.
Oh, that's a good point.
Yeah, people come and go and things change.
Exactly.
Yeah,
It's you can't really plan for it.
it's true.
Yeah.
You never know who's going to come into the picture.
Yeah, or leave the picture.
Or leave the picture, exactly.
But, sometimes those changes are good,
Yeah, definitely.
and sometimes they're bad.
Sometimes they're not so good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And in this case, I think we can all agree it's a bad change.
Oh, for sure.
because the doctor is not a good person.
No, she's not.
And she also uses some pretty harsh words.
She does.
Yeah, she gets pretty mean.
Like jerk and bastard.
Yeah. Ouch.
Right.
Yeah.
Those are some strong words.
I know, and I was thinking about that.
Yeah.
Like, even in the heat of the moment,
Right.
those are still pretty rough.
Yeah. They're definitely not your everyday vocabulary words.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I'm kind of curious.
Okay.
Like, what is it about those words
Yeah.
that makes them so harsh?
Well, I think it's interesting to break them down. Like,
Yeah.
jerk is relatively mild, you know?
Okay.
It just implies someone's inconsiderate or foolish.
All right.
But bastard, that one packs a punch. It's
right.
almost a swear word, and it
Sure.
can be really offensive.
Totally. And I noticed that both of those words
Ooh.
were directed at men
Yeah.
in this episode.
It's true.
Is there a reason for that?
That's a sharp observation.
Yeah.
It is true that those words are usually used against men.
Right. Yeah. So I don't know if it's just a coincidence
Right.
or if it like says something
Yeah.
about how we use language.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely raises questions about why that is.
Oh,
Like,
yeah.
maybe it's tied to traditional gender roles.
Right.
Or even like power dynamics throughout history.
Yeah,
It's definitely something worth thinking about.
totally.
Yeah.
And then another interesting thing about this podcast episode
What is it?
is that we get to see
Okay.
some like slang words
Ooh, slang.
Yeah.
I love slang.
Me too.
Yeah.
related to pregnancy.
Okay.
So one that they used was knocked up.
Oh, yeah, knocked up.
What do you think about that phrase?
I think it's definitely informal, almost crass.
Yeah.
It implies an unplanned pregnancy,
Yeah,
and it can be seen as disrespectful,
totally.
especially in the wrong setting.
For sure.
Yeah.
And like the fact that we even have slang for something like pregnancy,
Right.
it's kind of
It's true. It reveals a lot about how society views unplanned pregnancies. And like the judgments attached to them.
for sure.
Yeah.
And speaking of different perspectives
Yes.
on pregnancy,
Okay.
this episode also like
Yeah.
touches on how different societies
Right.
react to like unexpected pregnancies.
Definitely.
So for example,
Yeah.
they talk about how in some Latin American cultures,
Okay.
there's this huge pressure
Yes.
on young couples to get married
Yeah.
if the woman becomes pregnant,
It's true.
which is so different from like some Western cultures
Right.
where it's like not as big of a deal.
Totally. It really highlights those cultural differences.
Yeah.
How they can really impact people's lives.
Right. Like
Yeah.
it makes you think about like
Yeah.
how those different norms
Mm-hmm.
really impact individual choices.
Right, because suddenly it's not just a personal decision anymore.
Right.
But-
It's like
Yeah.
tangled up with like family honor,
Totally.
community values.
Absolutely.
maybe even religious beliefs.
Yeah. It's a lot to consider.
Right.
Yeah.
And they even use that term,
Oh, yeah.
living in sin.
What a phrase.
I know, right?
Living in sin.
It's so funny to me.
It does sound kind of old-fashioned.
It does.
Doesn't it?
Yeah,
Yeah.
but it's used to describe.
Right. It basically means like unmarried couples living together.
Yeah, but there's like this judgment attached to it.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
No.
Like it's this bad thing.
If you're doing something wrong.
Exactly.
Yeah, and it just makes you think about like
Yeah.
how language
Uh-huh.
can actually try to like control people.
Oh, totally. It's like the language itself
Yeah.
is trying to keep people in line
Totally.
with what's considered acceptable.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Which is crazy to me.
It is pretty wild when you think about it.
I know, right?
Yeah.
But it makes me think about how things are changing now.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Definitely. Like, are we moving away from these like outdated ideas?
That's the big question, right? I mean, language is always evolving.
Right.
It reflects how society changes.
Yeah.
And, you know, those old-fashioned terms start to sound, well, old-fashioned.
I'm glad about that.
Me too.
So you're saying we are kind of seeing this shift
Yeah, I think so.
towards more like accepting language.
Yeah, definitely. Especially when it comes to relationships.
Right.
I mean, think about it. Like, cohabitation is way more common now.
Yeah.
Single parenthood isn't as stigmatized as it used to be. And, like, same-sex relationships, thankfully, are much more visible and accepted.
Exactly.
And all of that
Yeah.
is mirrored in the way we talk about these things.
That makes sense. So
Yeah.
it's like language is finally catching up
Exactly.
to reality.
It's about time.
But I am curious about those cultural differences
Oh, yeah, for sure.
that we talked about earlier.
Right.
How does all of this play out in cultures where those traditional expectations are still like really strong?
That's where things get really interesting.
Yeah.
I mean, imagine you're a young couple
Yeah.
in a culture where marriage is the expectation.
Right.
suddenly an unplanned pregnancy throws everything into overdrive.
Yeah.
It's not just a personal decision anymore.
Right. You got like family honor,
Totally.
community pressure,
Yeah,
maybe even like religious beliefs
absolutely.
that are like dictating what you should do.
Exactly. It's a lot to handle.
And in some cultures,
Yeah.
there can be like serious consequences
Yeah.
for not conforming to those expectations,
It's true.
which is really sad.
It is.
So it's
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
while individual choice is still there,
Right.
the stakes are just much higher.
Yeah, exactly.
It also just highlights how important it is
For sure.
to understand these cultural nuances,
Mhm.
especially for someone learning English.
Absolutely.
Right.
Yeah.
Because they need to know
Right.
that certain phrases might carry a lot more weight
Exactly.
for some cultures.
Yeah, like living in sin.
Right.
Might sound almost humorous
Yeah.
to some people.
It does to me.
Right.
Yeah.
But for others, it represents a very real judgment, a
Mhm.
potentially hurtful judgment.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So it's like walking a tightrope.
It is.
You need to be aware
Yeah.
of the cultural context to
Uh-huh.
really understand what people mean
Totally.
and avoid causing like unintentional offense.
Exactly. You don't want to accidentally offend someone.
Right.
Just because you don't understand the cultural context.
Exactly. But
Yep.
speaking of cultural context,
Yeah.
how do these norms actually change?
That's a great question.
Like who decides it's time to like update the rule book?
I mean, culture isn't some fixed set of rules. It's
Rules.
constantly evolving. Like,
Right.
think about
Right.
how attitudes towards things like divorce
Mhm.
or same-sex marriage have shifted over time.
Totally.
Right. That's because individuals and groups start pushing back
Yeah.
against outdated norms.
So it's like this constant tug of war
Yeah, I like it.
between tradition and progress,
Yeah, it's a good analogy.
with language right there in the middle,
Yeah.
reflecting all the changes.
Language is both a mirror reflecting society
Okay.
and a tool that shapes it.
Interesting.
As new ideas and perspectives emerge,
Yeah.
new words are born. Old ones take on new meanings and language adapts.
So basically what
Yeah.
you're saying is language is never really finished.
Exactly. It's always a work in progress.
Okay. I'm starting to get the big picture here.
Good.
But how does all of this actually affect our day-to-day lives?
Yeah, that's the important question.
Like what can like our listeners
Right.
take away from this deep dive
That's the million-dollar question.
into like language and cultural norms?
I think the key takeaway is to be mindful
Okay.
of the power of words.
Yeah.
They can be incredibly powerful tools for
Mhm.
building understanding. Right.
Or for causing harm.
Yeah.
Especially when we're talking about sensitive topics like relationships.
So it's not just about memorizing like vocabulary words
Yeah.
or grammar rules.
Yeah.
It's about realizing that language is deeply connected to culture
Exactly.
and that every word we choose
Yep.
carries a whole history of meaning
Uh-huh.
and interpretation with it.
Absolutely.
And that understanding
Yes.
can help you navigate
Mm.
the complexities
Yeah.
of human relationships with more like sensitivity and
It's
awareness.
about recognizing that there's no one right way to do things.
Right.
And that different cultures have different values and expectations.
Yeah. And it's about avoiding those like
Yes.
awkward moments
Those foot and mouth moments.
where you say something that to you seems totally innocent,
Uh-huh.
but to someone else,
Yeah.
it's like incredibly offensive.
Right. You just put your foot in your mouth.
I've been there.
We've all been there.
Yeah.
But the good news is,
The more we learn about language and culture,
uh-huh.
the better equipped we are to avoid those pitfalls.
Okay.
It's about approaching every conversation
Yeah.
with a healthy dose of curiosity
Yeah.
and a willingness to learn from each other's experiences.
That's a good point.
So we've covered a lot of ground here,
We have.
from the tricky nuances of slang
Mm-hmm.
to the weighty implications of cultural norms.
But before we wrap things up, I think
Yeah.
it's important to address one more big question. So we've talked a lot about how cultural norms shape our choices
Right.
and behaviors.
Uh-huh.
But I'm wondering,
Okay.
at what point do we take responsibility for our own actions?
Ooh.
Like, are we just puppets
Right.
controlled by cultural expectations?
Yeah.
Or do we have the power to, like, break free?
That's the age-old debate
Right.
about individual agency versus societal pressure.
Exactly.
It's a crucial point to especially when discussing things as personal and emotionally charged
Yeah.
as pregnancy and relationships.
Like, it's easy to say,
yeah.
well, my culture expects this, so that's what I have to do.
Right.
But ultimately, we all have choices to make.
We do.
Right.
Even within a culture that has strict rules,
Yeah.
individuals can still decide whether to conform
Right.
or to forge their own path.
And sometimes those choices
Yeah.
involve challenging
Yeah.
the very norms that are
Exactly.
trying to define us.
Which is pretty awesome when you think about
I
it.
know, right?
Like, we're seeing more and more people pushing back
Yeah.
against those traditional expectations
Mhm.
and creating their own versions of love, family, and commitment.
Yeah. And it's so cool to see.
It is.
And it brings us back to the power of language.
It does.
As we continue to challenge those outdated norms and embrace new ways of being,
Yeah,
language evolves right alongside us.
it does. It's constantly changing.
So it's not just about understanding the existing rules.
Right.
It's about actively participating in rewriting them.
I love that.
Wow. This deep dive has really made me think differently about the way I use language
Me too.
and how much power it holds.
It's true. Words are powerful.
But before we get too carried away, I think it's time to bring this deep dive to a close.
Yeah, it's time to wrap things up.
I feel like we have explored so many different avenues,
We have.
from slang and idioms
Mhm.
to like cultural clashes and personal choices.
It's been quite a journey.
It really has.
We've dissected those tricky phrases,
Right.
uncovered the hidden meanings,
Yeah.
and even sparked a little bit of philosophical debate
Oh, yeah.
about individual freedom and societal norms.
It's true.
It's pretty impressive.
Who knew that an English learning podcast episode could lead us down such a fascinating path?
I know, right?
But before we officially wrap things up, I want to make sure
Yeah.
that our listener walks away something tangible.
Okay, I like that.
So we've talked about how language reflects culture,
Right.
how it can reinforce or challenge norms,
Mm-hmm.
and how individual choices kind of play a role in shaping those norms.
So the question is,
Yeah.
what responsibility do we have
Ooh, that's a good question.
to use language consciously and thoughtfully?
Especially when talking about these sensitive topics.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's not enough to just understand these concepts.
Right.
We need to apply them to our own lives.
So what's the final nugget of wisdom?
A final takeaway
Yes.
that we want to impart.
Well, I think it all comes down to this.
Okay.
Words have power.
They do.
They can either build bridges
Mm-hmm.
of understanding or create walls of division.
You're absolutely right.
And that's especially true when we're talking about things like...
Love, relationships, and family.
Exactly.
It's a call to action, urging us to be more mindful, empathetic, and intentional with our words.
Right.
Recognizing that even casual conversations can contribute to either reinforcing or challenging those societal norms.
So as we say goodbye for now,
Yeah.
dear listener,
We hope you'll carry this awareness with you.
remember every time you speak,
Yes.
you have the opportunity to choose words that promote understanding
Absolutely.
and inclusivity.
Exactly. It's a small act, but it can have a ripple effect
It really can.
by being more conscious of our language
Yes.
and the cultural context in which it's used.
Mhm.
We can all contribute to creating a world.
Where diverse perspectives are valued
Exactly.
and relationships are celebrated in all their wonderful and
Yeah.
messy forms.
Absolutely.
And on that note,
Yeah.
we'll sign off.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
We'll catch you on the next one.
Ready to explore more fascinating corners of language and culture.
Until then, happy exploring.